What do you think most people misunderstand about dance, and what does it actually reveal about how humans connect, trust, and lead?
Boy, it's amazing. So dancing is a metaphor for change. One of my mission statement in the beginning was we change lives one step at a time. And that was our mission statement since day one, because we really believe that the dancing is a small part of it. The dancing is obviously the vehicle that we use to achieve things. But when people come in, they come in for five reasons sometimes, and they're just to distill it down to something: fun and relaxation, exercise, meeting a special person or being with a special person. They come in for appearance. They come in for self-confidence, things like that. So I think when you find that when you dance, the dancing is a vehicle for movement, because when you move, so imagine we go through life and we have emotions, right? And our emotions sometimes are positive, sometimes are negative. Well, in physiological terms, our emotions get trapped. They get trapped into a muscle, and the musculature surrounds it, holds it in place, and there we are, we're all locked up. So how do you break that? Well, one minute of many ways, you start moving, you start dancing. When you're moving in ways your body is unaccustomed, those emotions come out and they get released. And when that happens, you create change in your body and you create change in your mind and in your heart.
Next level, we're reaching for the sky. Next level thinkers, we're
Hey, what's up,
aiming
guys? Welcome to Next
high.
Level Thinkers, a charting new horizons of brilliance podcast. My name is Rush, and I'm your host. What if the world said your story would never begin? Hunter Lisle was born 3 months premature, and doctors gave him a 5% chance to live and a 0% shot at a normal life. But they didn't see what was coming. Purpose. Before he could speak, he was already breaking the rules. At 8, he was doing magic, helping people believe again. At 15, he wasn't just dancing, he was teaching others how to move through their fear. By 22, he was judging professionally in an industry he was never supposed to be in. And by 30, he was leading one of the top Arthur Murray dance studios in the world. Not by chasing status, but by building joy step by step. This podcast is not a story about dance. It's about rhythm as a way of thinking, presence as power, and discipline as a path to healing. This is the Next Level Thinkers, a charting new horizons of brilliance podcast, and today we explore soul-driven leadership, timing, and legacy with Hunter Lisle, owner of Arthur Murray Dance Studio in Lexington, Kentucky. Hunter, it's a pleasure. I would say it's a pleasure to have you on this podcast. As a long time professional dancer and being in that industry for several years and traveling around the world, I always wonder when it was going to circle back into my life, and how I could bless the industry that gave me so much during a time that I needed some healing in my life, and to have you on this podcast is a pleasure and an honor. And having worked with you, for that matter, as your professional coach to me and my students at the time, I gained so much. It rebuilt so many broken things in my life to have a certain energy, the type of energy and enthusiasm and joy that you have in your life. When I was just trying to work through my own demons in my life, secretly trying to put on, trying to break through that. And
Yeah.
it's definitely an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
It was really great to be invited and a lot of fun. I'd watched your podcast and then we had texted a little bit, and it was so great to remember in 2006 that we actually got to work together and coach you. And you were fun to teach because you were always open and you were teachable. And so many people in our industry and in most industries, they want to learn, but they're not always teachable. So when you're open to things, it's amazing what you can accomplish.
Yeah, it's true. Like, I was hungry for a
Yes.
spiritual revival in me, and being, working with my students alongside me and having to be the vessel of
Yeah.
your expertise and passing on that information to my students is to bless their lives. I was getting blessed and they were getting blessed, and and you were being blessed by helping other people out. So it just became a win-win-win situation.
It really was. And I do remember your students, when they would look at you, they were just like, it was really neat because you passed on your energy to them. That studio, again, Texas was great, Plano, Dallas. I mean, it's like is a wonderful area and great owners of the studio, and you were just right there with them and driving and really helping them to reach their goals. And that's what we all do. I mean, that's how we got us started in this thing. Again, I love the brilliant thinkers, survivors, great ways of, doing things that people say you can't. People say you can't do it, or you shouldn't do it, or you can't do whatever, and you're able to accomplish something.
Yeah, and not only that, we break the conventional box that that's what next level thinkers is about being unconventional, breaking the box that people try to put you in. I remember when I being structured as being going down the road to become a dance teacher instructor. I hear some crackling. Do you hear crackling by chance?
Here, I don't know if it's on my end or your end. You probably have better audio and vision than I do, maybe
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it is. Okay,
a
so
little bit.
either way, so yeah, I just remember the whole experience of being going down that road as an instructor, and it's and being able to go down that path was an honor. I want to
Yeah,
start off. I want to start off the
sure.
conversation by asking you a couple of questions about when you were born. You were born
Yeah.
with 5% chance to survive, and looking back, when did you realize your life wasn't just about survival, but about significance?
It was interesting because as I grew older, I didn't know a lot of that when I first, of course, early on. And then later, as I grew and in my 20s and 30s, I heard all the stories, of course, of what had happened when I was very premature. And, your significance, you look back at things and you don't always appreciate them at the time. If we could have known now what we didn't know then, it'd be amazing. Is every decade produces a different level of wisdom, maybe a different level of awareness as well of the previous decades of what you're trying to accomplish or where you are. And it's good in some ways we don't think about it at the time because we might be fearful and we'd never try to accomplish anything. Sometimes not knowing actually allows you to try more. The energy, because you don't know what you can't do. And if people don't tell you what you can't do, you might actually accomplish it. So somewhere along the way, I remember teaching a student, and it was in a studio in Ohio, actually, in the 90s. And this little lady had walked by the studio multiple times, and we had a little bagel shop next to the studio. And so every day I'd walk out and I would say hello, and I'd try to get her to come in the studio. Well, she wouldn't do it. And so, we kept trying several times, but every day at the same time, I would go out and say hello. Well, one day this went on for a while. One day she moved away. I get a letter later, and this is the most amazing part. She said the bagel bag was empty and she was just walking by so someone would talk to her. She was about to commit suicide.
Mm.
And literally all she was looking for was a friendly face and someone to say hello. And that's one of those moments where you realize just a little bit of kindness or a little bit of reaching out, not being afraid to say hi to someone, not being afraid to do something makes a major impact that you might not even realize in that moment. But later you're like, whoa, it blows your brain. And you're like, okay, this is cool.
That's awesome, man. When you realized, you were premature. What does that say about, like, just at the beginning phase of your life, as you're born into this world? Have you reflected on, say, man, how lucky was I to that I was allowed to stay here on Earth and reap the rewards that you have in your life right now?
Yeah, I think you have moments of grace and you have moments where you are grateful that you're here, but there's also moments of where you're not sure about that. I mean, I was the ugly duckling when I was very young. I was shy, believe it or not.
Mm.
And when I look back, if you'd told me then all the TV stuff, all the things that I've been able to do with people and places, I probably wouldn't have believed it. And I was that kid, that liked to do things, but I was kind of like withdrawn, a little more of an introvert. And dancing was a vehicle, magic, things like that, where through performing, through putting myself outward, kind of created an openness inward, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. It's not like a linear path. It's not something where you just feel, hey, I'm grateful to be here. Because there's times you doubt it, and there's times you're like, why am I here? And you start to feel sorry for yourself. You're like, well, I don't know if I was supposed to do this or not. And I think you're constantly trying to break out of that. And that's the grace, that's the faith, that's the ability. And again, nobody's perfect. There are many days you go through and you're like, well, do I really feel this way? And I'm lucky because my wife is very supportive, very positive, and very, a big part of the journey. And she will politely remind me she was like, remember who you are. Because we forget those things. We forget who we are and why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Second question I have for you is, you started performing magic and teaching dance as a teenager. Do you see that as a moment, as the moment your leadership voice was forming, or were you just learning how to perform before you were ready to lead?
It's an amazing question because I think it kind of went hand in hand. The magic was a vehicle to try to get out of myself. And of course, I was a young kid, thought this was cool. I might meet girls. And of course, that doesn't work with magic. But anyway, dancing was a better vehicle for that. So, but with magic, you're trying to perform. And magic is a funny thing because it's introverted in the sense you're learning something, you're practicing it in front of mirrors over and over and over and over again. But then the fun part is performing. And that part is the energy with you and someone else. And myself kind of feeding off that energy. And by doing that, I saw a glimpse. I was at a trade show one time. I was 17 and I was there with a huge convention and I was doing stand-up magic, like walking around. And I remember talking to this group of people that were actually business people at the time. They were owning businesses. I was like 18, 17, 18 years old. And they were talking about their doubts and things. And after I did the tricks, I was like, okay, well, let's be positive. Let's talk about what you can do. And I remember having the rest of that conversation with them about what they could accomplish. And I was so young, I didn't even really know what I was doing, except at the end of it, they hired me back for another convention. And I thought it was about the magic. Turned to find out it was about what I had said to them. And they were like, man, that was motivating. That was your energy was contagious. So maybe energy kind of helps you to lead because it is contagious. And if you have that, you can share that with someone.
Yeah, don't you find it interesting that maybe you have you have your own mental roadblocks that you were, insecurities, whatever, whatever your looks or whatever physical, I guess physical like doubts of yourself and mental thoughts, emotional thoughts about yourself that are just they come out as insecurities, and
Yeah,
then once you're in that position, you're in the front, you say you're center stage, right? And
right.
at just a moment to shine, and you're not realizing that this whole magic of who you are comes out, not only just the magic you're performing.
That's right, and that is so accurate because you still get nervous. I mean, I believe it or not, still get nervous on most TV things that I do or camera. But once you start the performing and once you start in that engaging, it allows you to let yourself out a little bit. And maybe that's why we all do it because you don't get nervous. We did a charity event recently, we hosted one, and we've done it a lot of times, over 15 years. But every time when that camera comes on, there's still that gulp. Like, okay, what am I going to say? But then once it starts, boom, then you're on, and then it becomes a whole different thing, and it allows you to really process things, kind of be energetic. We all doubt ourselves. I mean, there's not one performer, one even person of significance that I've ever met that does not doubt themselves. I don't think there's anyone out there that in some form, whether it be your vocal, your communication, your physical, there's so many things that we all question. And yet, if you can just let that go and let that ego get out of there, get it gone, you can then accomplish something.
That brings that brings an interesting topic. Did success come faster than your self trust? I mean, that's what and if so, how did you catch up?
I'm not sure I've caught up yet, but I
I
think
hear
catching
that.
up is a lifelong process. And yes, we laugh about that because we kind of describe it as almost like the movie Forrest Gump. In that movie, he found himself in places that he couldn't believe. He found himself in places where it was improbable, and that's been most of our lives. I mean, we have found ourselves teaching people, being with people, working with people that were it's really unbelievable. And I don't know if it ever really catches up because I think if you say yes and you allow yourself to be open and by being open and being in service to other people, giving, then you find yourself in those moments and it just happens. It's almost like magic to say use a phrase because all of a sudden there you are. We've had moments where with rock stars, we've had moments with presidents, with celebrity, all kinds of people. And then you're like, how did I get here? How did I end up talking to that person? How did I end up? And it's a really great feeling. I don't know if you ever catch up. I mean, I like that quote because I like to think that at some point you get to revel in it a little bit and enjoy it. And I think that's the part that's fun. But I don't know if I've ever caught up
Yeah,
or not.
yeah, I feel that 100%. And speaking of the type of individuals that you've actually been in contact with, you've had access to great leaders that we've mentioned, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar. What did that kind of access teach you about the difference between a real influence and a curated image?
Yeah, so that we use that word a lot lately because I've used it. And we were just talking about that word because it's relevant in the sense that, when you meet people of significance, and we say true significance, where they've achieved a level of success for themselves, and that's not, and I hate to use the word fake, but it's when it's new, you're still grasping. You're trying to make something happen. When they have success and it's real, you find them to be pretty down to earth, actually. And one of the first ones that I got to really encounter was a man named Zig Ziglar when he was alive. And he was famous in this space of like motivation, sales, things like that. He actually sold Tupperware, believe it or not, at one point, and then went on to found a major organization. And I was very young. I was 17 to 19 years old. A lot of things happened back then. And I don't know
Wow.
how I got there. It was a Born to Win seminar in Texas, actually. And I got myself there, and I was sitting in the audience wearing a little suit that was probably ill fitting. I was like, I got myself there, and that's what mattered. And during that seminar, he asked the audience, who wants $100? And I remember standing up and like this, and then I was like, oh, I was the only one that stood up. So basically, he pointed at me and he was like, young man, come up here. Now you got to imagine, I was young, I was again introverted a little bit, and I'm sitting there like, I got to walk up there now. So I walked up on stage. And he said, you were the one that stood up. You get the $100 bill. And he signed it for me back then. And we ended up talking a little bit. And what struck me was what fascinating is how real he was. He was one of those people that he talked to more about me asking my goals, my questions. And of course, at 18, you're like, okay, I've got the goals change over the years. But later, fast forward, we got to work with Anthony Robbins one time and did the firewall, did all those things. And when I spoke to him, same thing. He would ask questions about you and about where you were. And I worked with some interviewers later for TV that were really great interviewers, like yourself doing this. And they ask about the other person. They start to engage, and there's always a mix of both because you want to get to know people. But I find the people of significance usually have something real to say, and they're more about helping other people. They say a great leader actually is not a circle. A great leader is a figure eight because the figure eight leads you from your own circle into this circle. So the
Wow.
true teachers or true leaders don't lead you back to themselves. They lead you outside of yourself into a different sphere, into a different area.
Wow, that's awesome, man. That I mean, to have that, to have be the only one to stand up in an audience where Zig Ziglar is calling you to stand up. You think it's a trap, or maybe that that insecure self didn't, but he recognized even that small movement in that one moment meant so much for you it was going to mean so much for you in the end, and he wanted to bring you up stage and make sure he
Yeah.
acknowledged that. That's awesome, man. That's
I
epic.
never will forget it. Like I said, it meant a lot to me over the years went by.
You built a high performance studio in you've built a high performance studio in a high pressure industry. How do you keep it from hardening? How do you keep it from hardening your heart? We talked about your heart and keeping it in a healthy space a few minutes ago. How do you keep that? Because I know burnout in dance world is a real thing.
Yeah.
Having taught and it is spiritually draining. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Uh, let's talk about that. Let's talk
All
about
right.
all of that.
It is a challenge because, we went to a franchisee convention recently, and I was kind of laughing because I'm one of the younger old timers, because once you get past 20 years or 30 or 40, there's not as many people in the industry
Mm.
because it is a hard industry. It's challenging. It's a lot of fun, very rewarding, but very challenging. So I think the trick to keeping it open and not letting it harden your heart is looking through the eyes of a child. Imagine that when you're working with a student, and we try to train our staff on this too, for them, it's their first time. For you, it's your thousandth. So when you're teaching a lesson or you're communicating with someone, and I try hard to remember this, even when I'm doing a podcast or a TV thing or whatever, and that's not always easy, believe me. I make it sound easier than it is to remember that for that person, it's their first new experience, and whatever that means. And to me, that's energizing because it makes you look through it differently. There was a couple last night, a good example. First time, they were very negative at first. They were scared, basically fearful to be there. And after the first lesson, they were overjoyed. I mean, they were literally beaming. And the guy was like, I've been looking for something like this for years for us to do. And they just rate. And, my energy level just went through the roof because I was like, wow, I got that feeling as well. And so I think in our industry, it is not an easy industry because you're helping people, you're teaching them, and you're trying to overcome their fears. We always say, what is the challenge when someone walks in the door? It's two things. It's, do they feel they can do it? Do they feel they're going to like it? If they like it, they can do it, they're going to take lessons. If you don't like something, you're probably not going to do it. You're going to find an excuse. Or if you don't think you can do it, you're also going to find an excuse. So if you can reach them that way, that's a really good thing. So I think to be open with your, not letting it harden your heart is trying to keep that newness, that sense of this is their first time. Even with staff, sometimes that's not easy. As you know, when you have 3 staff members, it's easy. When you have 10 staff members, it's a whole different game. And you're trying to integrate personalities. I also think that the ability in our business to be successful relies on one thing that nobody talks about, and that is the ability to manage multiple relationships at any given moment. Because we have those limits as human beings as we get older, in my 30s, 40s, 50s, where you don't have as many friends as you had during high school, college, and you're learning how to manage relationships. And you might have 20 in one day. When you taught, and I have to brag on you just quickly because you taught the most lessons of anybody in the world, man. I mean, you did 140 lessons in one week. That is humanly impressive. My top was around 82, and I don't think I ever broke 100. But to do that was not just the physical stamina. The physical stamina is a very small part of what that means. It's the emotional, it's the spiritual, it's your heart. And so when I read that question, we were talking earlier, and I really appreciate you giving me some ideas. That was a great question because that is the challenge in our industry. When I see people leave the industry, they'll use excuses like, well, I'm bored or I'm burned out. Well, what is burnout? Burnout is boredom. Burnout is finding a way not to be inspired. Burnout is a way to not let yourself feel open. So, not letting your heart harden is a key component of that level of success and probably what drove us to be successful. Although, and again, I can stop anytime, but like the story I was going to tell you in 1991, I went through that. I was burned out. I was like ready to get out because I'd had a bad year. The studio was a very small studio and some very strong negative influences. And I was a young single teacher. And so I went to a seminar that year. And ironically, the teacher was very successful in Beverly Hills. And they were doing great things and they were writing a procedure to help people achieve their goals. And they had gone to Anthony Robbins that year. That was the funny coincidental part. In fact, so for fun for you, the book that was written that year, was Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins.
Wow.
And I still have that original book, actually. And I heard that seminar, and I went back to the studio, and I thought, okay, I'm going to give it 6 months, and I'm going to either change what we're doing or I'm out. And literally, and so in that next 6 months, we took that studio from a smaller studio to a mid-size. We had a 400% increase in 6 months. And the staff were doing great. We were doing great. And that launched everything. And from that point on, I was like, okay, it's time to make this a career and continue on forward.
Yeah, it's crazy because even with the 140 lessons, you had to do an exchange, right? You had to do exchange. Every time you had one, you had to give one. So it was kind of one of those things. And I still did 140 lessons. So I got to brag about myself a little bit. So everyone benefited from that experience. Let's just
They
say.
did. Well, your whole team, I remember, again, we know Claudia and Zach very well in that area and been friends with them for many years. And it's like you achieve something that very few people get to do. And it does require teamwork. I was thinking to myself, the exchange lessons, the balancing of that is really something.
Yeah.
And it's a shame you made the Guinness Book of World Records as far as the record. It was a shame that they wouldn't allow it because they're paid lessons and all that. But you essentially did it. You can actually say you did that, and that's a really great accomplishment.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Not about me, about you. What's something you once believed about leadership that you now know is completely false, but you had to unlearn it in public?
So we wrote some notes down. So, wrote some notes about this because, leadership is not what you think it is. We get on LinkedIn, and we all are high profile, and it's like everybody wants to say, this is what I've done. This is what I've accomplished. And we all, there's a modicum of truth there because you have to do that to help yourself go forward. But the real leadership is about other people. It's about service. It's about serving other people and maybe having a servant mindset, to be honest. And again, that's to go back, spin backward for a second and go forward. That's where the magic came in. I bartended during college. It's like things where you're serving other people and then that leads you back. Also to be open. And I think we were talking about this earlier this morning, my wife and I, in order to lead, you have to follow. You have to learn to follow. You have to learn to be able to follow in order to lead. So leadership is a never-ending journey. And there's times when you have to be strong. There's times when you have to be weak. There's times when you have to bend and not break. You have to learn to bend. And to me, sometimes that's the hardest thing because I have a lot of energy. I tend to want to go straight forward and just barrel through, and I'm kind of like the bull in the Tiffany's to China shop. Like sometimes I want to go forward, and you have to learn to do that. And I'm lucky; I have loving people around me that are very supportive, and they're like, "By the way, you might want to take a breath here." So, learning to bend and not break is amazing. Learning to serve in order to lead, because when you serve, the other thing we did in the studio, and I believe is I wear a tie every day, not because I just love wearing a tie, although I like some of them, but we told our staff to dress up. They have a dress code, and we didn't feel
Nice.
that we could say that to them without me doing it. So, if you're going to lead, it's like you're walking through the minefield. You walk ahead of them. You step in the holes ahead of them so that when they step, they're safe. And so we always use the phrase with our staff, I won't tell them to do anything in the industry that I haven't done or I can't do or I'm not willing to do. And I think that's really important because you kind of walk the walk.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, you got to walk the walk. Yeah, I haven't worn it. I don't think it's been a while since I've worn a tie like on a regular basis when I show up with my custom shirts because I would have to get locked in with my attire. I had everything fitted, all that. It was really great. That's awesome. I think you're
Well,
right with everything. Having a servant heart is so important. Like
yes.
having a servant heart is so important. You've coached thousands and judged excellence, but was there ever a moment you felt like I hate to say the F word, but a fraud even when you were winning?
Yes. I think,
I don't want to insult anybody. I'm not saying it, sometimes you can, people can misinterpret that too, and say, hey, you're this when you're really not.
no, I think that there's how do I say this, when you're going through success, at any moment, we all have those moments. There's not, again, it's not a linear path. And I think when you read people that are successful, or you talk to them even in person, that's what comes across. Because I remember judging one of my first times judging, and okay, I'll give you a good example. This happened actually recently. So in 2019, I was judging a competition called the Emerald Ball. And I was very lucky that it was out in LA. It's one of the biggest competitions in the United
Yeah.
States. And the owner's a great guy. And they had done something unusual that year. They did voting for the top 20 teachers or top 20 judges in the world. So
Mm.
anyway, you had to get nominated. And one day we looked down and I was nominated. And I was like, to be honest with you, I was just feeling grateful to be nominated because I was like, hey, that's really cool. Well, then later we got picked. So I go out there and there was a moment I'm standing there, okay, and I'm, with a clipboard and I'm watching all these dancers. And when you're doing that, you're very focused and you're watching the dancers, you're watching them go, you're trying to focus on them because they've worked so hard to get to where they want to be. So I'm standing next to these two judges and I was like, oh, this is really cool because I'm standing next to these amazing judges and this great thing. And I was complimenting one of them. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean? I said, well, this is great to get to know you and you're an amazing judge. And I remember what he said. He looked at me and said, you're here with us. You're one of those two, and I remember that moment because I was like, it's not that you feel like you're totally a fraud, but you're feeling like, oh, I'm here. And you forget you're there with them. You forget you are one. And so I think we all have those moments where you doubt yourself a little bit because you find yourself in a place where you've never been. It's a new experience. And I think once you've done it a couple of times, you feel less and less like that. I think repetition is the goal for success. They say that there's inspiration, there's perspiration, and then there's mastery, because you have to go through those moments over and over again. And I
Yeah.
remember doing it again. And this time I was in my element. I was like, okay, I'm here and I'm here for a reason and I'm going to do my job. And I think that's when you start to feel competency and mastery at that point.
Mm. Yeah, I think that, I agree with you. When we talk about imposter syndrome, I guess that's what we would label this experience as when you're standing next to your idols in the dance world, right? You're
Yeah.
standing next to people who are just these epic, and you're like, hey, it's great to, can I take a picture with you? you
Right.
know?
Yes. When those moments happen, it blows
Yeah.
my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
truly, I'm just like, I get almost giddy because I'm like, okay, wait, they want a picture of me? So it's kind of a fun moment anyway.
That's awesome, man. You've lived a life most people wouldn't believe. They didn't believe it when I was living it, for sure.
Right.
Does it ever feel accidental, or have you made peace with how wild it's been?
I think more and more, and I'll be honest, I think I've done about 8 podcasts this year, give or take, and
Nice.
I've been very blessed to be a guest and talk about different things, and it's been really enjoyable for a reason that you wouldn't expect because it forced me to go back and remember. And we talked about remembering the past a little bit to go forward. And so I think that's part of it is like I don't believe necessarily in accidents, but I think when you have faith and there's destiny and you're put in different places for different reasons. You might not know it. I did it, and I relate stories a lot because it's like that's we always learn in the dance business to teach with stories because that's how as human beings we evolve. We learn to learn to lead, to learn like that.
Yeah.
So there was a moment I was driving a car not that long ago, 6 months ago, and I had someone almost cause me a crash, like a wreck, and because the person literally, long story short, pulled a weapon on me. It was a random moment where I was in a car and I pulled up to a stop sign. The person was following me, and I was on the phone with 911 for 20 minutes. They followed me the entire way. I was very, very lucky because I ended up gunning the car, going past them, and they caught the guy. It was just a random thing that happens. But at one point, there was a gun pointed at my head randomly. Well, then later, that same next week, I met a guy who runs a podcast called 815 AIDS for first responders. And again, we were just talking about the story. And he said, man, I'd love to have you come on because there's so many people that don't realize the impact of those 911 operators or those people that are in that thing. So again, we're talking about accidental versus, so I found myself in a position where that was a negative and scared the heck out of me. Don't get me wrong. I was almost PTSD for about a week because every time I saw a motorcycle, I cringed. So it didn't happen overnight that I got over it. But then the next week, I was able to share a story with someone that might have impacted somebody else. So was that accidental? No. I think that those moments are not accidental at all. I think they're led there for a reason. And you might not always know the reason in the moment, but if you can stay open, and don't get me wrong, that's not easy. When we make it sound easy because we're talking on the podcast, but you struggle internally with that because you want to make it be easy for other people, but it's not easy for yourself. It takes courage. It takes heart. It takes strength. It takes conviction. And it takes belief in yourself and belief in a higher power, belief in God. You literally have to have that faith and then go, okay, this happened for a reason. Now, what is that reason?
Yeah, that's so true, man. I live on that philosophy, like accidentally on purpose, where I accidentally said I'm going to go in this dance studio and say I think I can dance, on a Saturday, look for a job who looks for a job on a Saturday? You know what I mean? Accidentally on purpose, I'm traveling around the world, like I led myself, God led me to it. Actually, I think he led me. We had a integral part of that. It gave me the wisdom to go, hey, you need to change your personality a little bit, so.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's what does it for all of us. When people walk in the door at the studio, I hear this all the time. Gosh, I wish I had done it when I was younger, or I wish I'd done it 10 years ago. And I always tell them, the moment you walk in that door, that is your right time. That is your time to be here. Because whatever happened before might not have led you to this place. So that is your right time. Like when you walked in on that Saturday, that was the moment for you. And if you'd waited another week or a week before that, it might not have been the right time. It wouldn't have led to the same outcome.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think most people misunderstand about dance, and what does it actually reveal about how humans connect, trust, and lead?
Boy, it's amazing. So dancing is a metaphor for change. One of my mission statement in the beginning was, we change lives one step at a time. And that was our mission statement since day one, because we really believe that the dancing is a small part of it. The dancing is obviously the vehicle that we use to achieve things. But when people come in, they come in for 5 reasons sometimes, and they're just to distill it down to something: fun and relaxation, exercise, meeting a special person or being with a special person. They come in for appearance. They come in for self-confidence, things like that. So I think when you find that when you dance, the dancing is a vehicle for movement, because when you move, so imagine we go through life and we have emotions, right? And our emotions sometimes are positive, sometimes they're negative. Well, in physiological terms, our emotions get trapped. They get trapped into a muscle, and the musculature surrounds it, holds it in place, and there we are, we're all locked up. So how do you break that? Well, one of many ways, you start moving, you start dancing. When you're moving in ways your body is unaccustomed, those emotions come out and they get released. And when that happens, you create change in your body, and you create change in your mind and in your heart. And I see that every day. So dancing is a form of therapy in a good way, but you don't realize you're doing that, so you're not bored, so you're going to stick with it. And then the change starts to happen layer by layer. We see people happen with themselves. We see them have laughter. They have fun. They come in like this, and then they go like this. and they get done and their shoulder lines are dropped. And you see couples come in that have been fighting or they've been having a hard time. And all of a sudden you see them connect. I had one couple this week, they gave themselves a hug. And the guy said this out loud. This is the first time we've hugged in 20 years.
Mhm.
And I mean, my mouth hit the floor. And, and we gave them a hug and we said hello. We said, great, we're glad you're here. You're part of our family. Come back. So I think we do see that a lot. I think dancing is not what we think it is. We use it. And obviously dancing itself, the movement creates joy. When you're flying across the floor, I mean, there's an elation like nothing else. And even if you mess up, that's okay. You just keep going, and I think that's like that in life as well.
Yeah, yeah, I messed up a lot because I remember what's his name? I think his name's James. He would be pulling his ear all the time, and
Yes.
I'm like, man, I'm not thinking about you right now. I gotta keep on. I'm gonna enjoy this even if my timing is off.
That's right. Because we have those moments. I mean, we're all going to mess up. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
my first competition, and I won't say where it was, but I was young. I was doing standard. Now, back then, international standard, smooth dancing, back then, waltz, foxtrot, tango, to give a reference point, I was the shortest one because all those guys were very tall.
Mhm.
And, I'm 5'7" on a good day. So, I was literally out there nervous, and I walked onto the floor. I'm already nervous, and I hit that floor and went out. My feet went out from under me, and I landed flat on my back. Now, you can imagine being very young and looking up, going, how do I get up? And there's all these people, of course, people are laughing. I finally stood up and I just walked on the floor. We danced. I ended up placing very high that time, in a finalist actually. But I remember laughing later because I was sweating. I was red faced. I was nervous. My suit was drenched because I was just so nervous when that happened. And you got to laugh and you got to just find those moments of humor and keep going.
That's great, man. That's great. Okay, so I want to ask a question. Like, okay, so every dance has its own personality, right?
Yeah.
When you think about an individual who comes in and they're looking for the things you mentioned, sense of belonging, all those things. How much is the dance, the characteristics of a dance? How does that bless someone's life when they're dancing? Let's say different, the personalities of 17 different dances, right? 17 dance pro, whatever. It's like not
Right.
just that, but for student. How does the characteristic of a dance help somebody change?
So that's an interesting question because when you first learn, you're learning multiple dances because you're trying to get a sense of what you like. And so one of the things we do that kind of leads to that is in the beginning, it's like we liken it to like eating a meal. If
Hmm.
you go to have a meal and you only see one food, you might try that food, but you might love it or you might hate it. So we try to give a smorgasbord. We try to give, okay, taste a bite of this, taste a bite of that. So we're hoping that even sometimes it's unspoken that the person finds something they like, and then you do see that you'll see someone do a tango, and that speaks to them because it's a more creative dance. It allows you to feel the music. That was one of our favorite dances, one of the first dances I ever learned. First dance I did with my wife. It's like you. So that dance spoke to me. You might say someone does a foxtrot and they start to move around the floor, and that freedom of movement is what they were missing. Or they do a cha-cha and they want to move in place and they want to get the Cuban motion going, and all of a sudden they're like, I can move my body. I remember having one guy say to me, he said, I'm doing Cuban motion, my knees actually work. And I was like, yeah, your knees can work. And that was a moment. So I think each dance does have a character, and it does have something that gives something. Sometimes they do waltz, and the waltz creates a rhythm, a flow. It creates a rotation. It's almost like dancing on the waves of an ocean. You feel that rise, that ebb, that flow, and that gives a sense of freedom. You find someone that does like a samba, and you got the energy, and you're out there, and they're moving through that, and all of a sudden they go, whoa, this is cool. And so I think each dance does impart something. So you name these with characters, sometimes like foxtrot is a movement dance. Waltz is a circular dance. But that's just a trigger for the mind to try
Yeah.
to see where you are. And I think the dancing does bring out different parts of your personality. I like to let people do multiple dances though, because I think sometimes the flip side of this, people do one dance. And when they do only one dance and that's it, they get blocked sometimes because as a learner, you're going to have a place where you can't go any further. Your mind gets stuck, and then you got to have a place to go. So if you break that cycle, that rhythm, then you can go somewhere with that.
I asked that question because I know how it blessed my life. And, when I think of, I had already been through some trauma. I had already been in combat. I came through that with issues coming out of it, right? Combat PTSD and interpersonal problems, identity problems coming
Right.
back and transitioning out. So The reason I ask that is because I ask you because when you think of people that become hardened, right? They're forged in chaos. They were forged in chaos, and they're trying to break their shell. Um, how important it is for somebody like for combat vets to come in and say, hey, we want to get you in touch with that playful nature of you, the playful side of you. And for me, it was very stoic. I was very stoic, very hardened, but was still willing to try to, God was leading me, say, you got to change.
Yeah.
But how is it when you think of combat vets who come in to the dance studio? How does it bless their life?
We actually have that a lot, and we always welcome that because we teach a lot of military, we teach a lot of EMTs, firefighters, police, etc. And when you're in that field, I mean, as you know, it's a high stress. You're
Yeah.
dealing with situations that most people never encounter, and no matter how good you are, with enough repetition of that, you're going to have a harder heart. And so when I see people come in like that, what I find is at first they're very guarded. There's a wall, and as they start moving, like we were talking a minute ago, it's like the movement itself starts to break through that actually. And usually by, 30, 45 minutes, you see a glimpse. You see like, and sometimes that wall goes right back up. Sometimes it stays down and then it goes up and then it goes down and it comes up. And so eventually it has a progression where it lowers completely. There was a couple last night that they do a podcast and, and he said, man, I'm having a ball. This has been better than I ever thought because we're laughing. And he said before that he was a combat vet and he was like, I didn't laugh much. He said I would go in anywhere and I was always guarded because I was always in a place where I was expecting the worst. And he
Hmm.
said, coming in here, he said it was hard at first because I couldn't let go of that. And he said, I'm finding moments of joy. They called it shortcuts to happiness. And literally, when you come in, that's what happens. So I find that when you're a vet, it's a wonderful thing. And if you're a vet watching this or listening to this, don't be afraid to try it. Call the studio, text us, text wherever you're watching this from, and give it a shot, give it a try. You'll be really pleased and very surprised at the level of change you can experience in your own life. And we say that because a lot of people don't know they can. They don't know they don't need a partner. If they have a partner, that's great, but you don't need one. You can walk in that door and you can change your life. And that is so important.
And I affirm everything Hunter just said. It was one of those things that is, I think you said it right when it was a shortcut to happiness. And, it was it did help ease, bring my every playful personality that I had that I left in the desert, right? Like everything that I had, everything, the person I left didn't come back. The person, that left, didn't come back the same person. But once I got into it, I traveled around the world doing it, so
Yes.
yeah. Okay. I had last question and then I have something for you. Let's see here. If someone's lost their rhythm in life or in leadership, what's the first step back into alignment?
So, of all the questions, to me, that was one of the hardest ones because we were talking about that, and it happens to all of us. It happens to me sometimes on a daily basis. It happens on, I think, anybody that has other people responsible to them and for them, because you're, whether it be employees or students or you're in a leadership position, you're going to have those moments. You're going to have, there's just no way around it. So we were thinking about different things, and we were talking about speaking things into being, that if you can maintain a positive thing, and I know this was a quote that was used a long time ago. There's very few new quotes. We quote other people because there's not many. You try to have a new thought, but we don't want to, we're always saying thoughts that we've heard before because we have mentors and people that share that knowledge with us, and then we pass it along. So if you could speak the truth in advance, and if you could remember to say what you want and say what your goal is, what your accomplishment is, then I think sometimes you can affect change more quickly, and you can find that, you can find that place. And I was writing that down because it's like, it is a rhythm, and the rhythm is not, again, I use that word several times, not linear. If it were linear, it'd be easy because we would hit that level of success or that level of rhythm in our feel, and we'd feel great. And then there's times when you hit that, for lack of a better word, a flow state where you're in flow and everything is going your way. Time is moving like this, it's like, imagine if you have a first date, you're on your very first date and 2 hours goes by in the space of a minute, or you're doing your paperwork or your taxes or whatever, and that minute takes 5 hours. That's a flow state. That's a state where you're in rhythm. You're in the rhythm of the world. You're in the rhythm of the universe in what you're doing. And I think if we could cultivate that more and more, that'd be the key. A lot of times it's just pausing or having even someone around you that says, hey, it's okay. Life is better than you think. If you set your bar, if your bar is, hey, today I'm vertical and I'm upright and I'm alive. Well, now the rest of the day is going to keep getting better. We put very high expectations on ourselves, and I do this on myself too. And we forget that those expectations creates limitations. So an expectation creates a limit, and the limit creates the problem. So if you could create an expectation of, I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm wise, I'm wealthy, I'm going to do the things I want. One of the teachers years ago said to me, you can be right or you can be rich, but you can't be both all the time, and which one do you rather be? And that was a very funny quote, and obviously it's not just about money and all that, but his point was you can't always be right. You have to have days where you're going to have doubts and you're going to have this. But the trick is get back up, take one more day, put one more foot in front of the other. There's no great secret except keep going. You can only fail if you stop. You can only fail if you don't get back up. If you fall down, stand up. And if you stand up, go again. And that's how you achieve success. And I think sometimes you achieve that rhythm again because the rhythm is still there. The rhythm keeps going. We just stepped aside for a second. And if you can step back into that rhythm, you're going to move forward again.
That's awesome, man. That is so awesome. Hunter, it's great to have you on this podcast. I appreciate the time, as we're mutually aligned, in our journey in many ways, being in the dance business, you have a vested interest in the students that are in your life. And I shared that space at one time and I was very rewarded by that. And I appreciate your time. I do this with all my guests. I always say, hey, look, is there a person that you want to affirm? Is there a thank you want to give to somebody or some organization or someone out there to give them a shout out? I'm going to leave the floor open for you to do that right now.
So it's always it's like the Oscar speech when you're out there and you're anywhere and you're like, how do I thank everyone? But again, and it sounds cliche, but it's true. You've got God, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got employees, you've got students, you've got mentors. There's not one thing, because everyone gives what they can at that moment. Every mentor wants to help someone else, hopefully. A family member, to the best of their ability, tries to help. It takes extraordinary patience sometimes because you're with family, and if you get older, we all are, I am, you have family that you're helping or things like that, and that takes patience. Or, you expect something that you don't. So I think it's a lot of times, it's the people in your life. It's not just one. It's all of them. But I think at the top, obviously, you have to have faith. You have to have belief. And, you can't do it on your own. No one's an island. No one's going to do this journey of success by themselves. And, and I have to be honest with you, when I saw your first text, I was just so excited because it revisited a past for me where I got to help you and connect to you. And I remembered you when you said all that. And I was like, wow. And my first thought was, I hope I made a difference in his life. And that's the thing, because it's interconnected, it's interdependent, not independent and not dependent. It's interdependent, which is a synergy. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Hunter, I'd love to come down to your studio. My wife and I have never been to Kentucky. It's one things we want to go, do what we got to do in Kentucky, but we'd love to stop by and get to spend some time with you.
We would love to take you out to dinner, have fun, show you around. You're always welcome here.
And my wife's lucky; she has a guy that knows how to dance, so maybe we can do a couple of dance lessons out there, and maybe I can share some stuff with your staff about how great of a job they're doing with you at.
I would love to have you come in and talk to our staff. And if you're watching this and you want to take dance lessons, go to dancingiseasy.com. I think it's a cool website. It's ours because dancing is easy. It's fun. And if you go to the website, you can try a free lesson. You don't have to be nervous. Try a free one. See if you like it. It's one-on-one. There's no stress. Come and have some fun.
Again, thank you, Hunter. It was a pleasure to have you.
Truly.
And I'll just say, I say this with all my, for the end of the podcast, I always say, guys, that's a wrap. I want to tell you guys, as I always say, have peace and enlighten you. And remember that the ocean refuses no river.
Next level, we're reaching for the sky. Next level.